We're talking Giants with Justin Penik, one half of the Talking Giants duo. Coaching changes, draft, free agency, plus are Joe Shane and Brian Dable on the hot seat this year if the Giants don't step up? All of that's coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, P-Train, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On and, of course, for Giants Country over on the Fan Nation Network. And I want to send a special welcome to my everydayers, my Blue Crew community members, my newcomers, and everybody in between. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, I am very happy to welcome in Justin Penik, who's one half of the dynamic duo over at Talking Giants with Bobby Skinner. And he's here to talk, what else? To talk Giants. That's what they do. So, Justin, welcome on in to the Locked On Giants podcast, and thank you for joining me.
Patty, thank you for having me as always. I like that this has been like a yearly tradition of, around the Senior Bowl when the offseason kind of is in between that period of calm, but we're waiting for the combine. We're going to start to hear some draft nuggets, some free agency nuggets, and more or less what this team is gonna look like. So always excited to hop on with you this time of the year. And then like you said, let's do it. Let's talk some Giants.
Yeah. And of course, later on, for those wondering, I will invite Bobby on. One of these days I have to have them both on, but for the time being, we'll just do one at a time.
We talk to each other enough.
Okay. All right, Justin, a lot has gone down since the Giants season has ended. Let's start with some of the coaching changes. Tell me what you like, what you don't like, what has you most concerned about the coaching changes that were made by Brian Dable.
Well, it's not even that there was coaching changes, right? I think it's just how everything has went down. It's not necessarily who or what. It's kind of the how for me that has me really more concerned than anything heading into year three. Because we ended the year, and especially thinking after that Rams game where it's like, man, they competed tooth and nail with the really, really tough team in the Rams. And, even the ending the season, really dismantling the Philadelphia Eagles. And it's like, you feel like maybe this team is closer. You need health to go their way. Obviously they need to, maybe address the quarterback room in whichever way that, they possibly could. But then the season ended and you heard things about Brian Dable, and you saw the way that the relationship dismantled over time between Wink Martindale and Brian Dable. And now we're still a little unsure of even the relationship between Mike Kafka and Brian Dable. Is Mike Kafka going to be calling plays next year? How much of a step does Brian Dable, want to take in the offense? Obviously, Mike Kafka getting that assistant head coaching title, that has to make him feel pretty good. Probably got a little bit of a pay raise as well, which doesn't hurt. But I would say just how everything has gone down this offseason, not necessarily that Wink Martindale left and Shane Bowen's in here, but it's how that, especially the relationship with the coordinators, how Brian Dable is going about his business. Is he going to be able to self-evaluate? And I kind of feel like it kind of comes down to him like calming down. Like that's really just, I've said on Talkin Giants, like, doesn't it feel as simple as Brian Dable just kind of taking a little bit of a chill pill and being a little bit less impulsive? It kind of feels like that's what the answer is. But in terms of who they've brought in, I kind of do have no complaints. I'm glad that Mike Kafka is still here. I think that he is an advantage for the Giants. Shane Bowen, I would have certainly preferred. I think the Giants would have preferred their top two candidates and Bobby Babbage and Denard Wilson. I like those as more exciting hires, but Bowen has experience, and he's worked with guys like Jim Schwartz. He's obviously worked with guys like Mike Vrabel, so that excites me. And Bowen's going to be able to run his own ship here in New York as well. So I'm excited about the guys that they kind of have brought in, but still a little, I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't a little bit worried about how Brian Dable is, working with some of his coaches and especially his coordinators.
In terms of his intensity level, I would assume you're talking about.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, something he needs to maybe think about dialing it back just a little bit. We saw Tom Coughlin when he first came here. He was, quite the force, if you will, and he dialed it back and learned to kind of balance it out. But Justin, staying with the coaches for a second, I want to float out a theory that I have, and I want to get your take on this. And in particular, the promotions to for Mike Kafka and for Shea Tierney, the quarterback's coach. Now, to me, I look at these promotions, Kafka's going to be the assistant head coach. Tierney's going to be the passing game coordinator. So it's almost like a redistribution of some of the game day duties, the weekly duties. Does that, to you, indicate that maybe a young quarterback might be coming on board to where Dable maybe wanted to offload some of the things on his plate to Kafka and thus offload some of the things from Kafka's plate to Tierney so that Dable can really be hands-on with a potential new quarterback?
No, I haven't thought of it like that. Patty, it's a really interesting theory. I mean, I've kind of thought of it as Mike Kafka. It's been two off-season cycles where he's gotten head coaching interviews, and now 2 off-season cycles where he's gotten to the final round. So it seems like, another off-season, if the Giants have a decent year. I mean, I'm rooting for Mike Kafka to get a head coaching job. You want to know why I'm rooting for that? Because I think that means that the Giants have a good offensive year, and I'm 100% rooting for that. So I view that as for Kafka that, hey, you're garnering respect around the league. He recently just did a really good job with the Shrine Bowl, reportedly. So I view that as, I think you deserve that upgrade. I think you deserve that title upgrade. And then even for Shea Tierney, it does feel like he is if Mike Kafka were to kind of move on, transition, he feels like the shoe-in that makes the most sense right now for offensive coordinator. And I don't think anybody would have batted an eye. Like if Mike Kafka got that Seattle job, I'm not sure anybody would have batted an eye if Shea Tierney just got that upgrade to offense coordinator. I don't think anybody would have had a really major issue with that. So it's a really interesting theory about these guys getting, especially on game day, getting these upgrades so Dable can spend more time with the quarterback, especially with the reports being that if he wants to be more hands-on with the offense, and that certainly would indicate that. But I also view it as Shea Tierney. You saw the work that he did with Tyrod Taylor and Tommy DeVito last year. You saw the work that he did with Daniel Jones in 2022. And now Mike Kafka, 2 off seasons in a row where he's getting head coaching interviews. I also view it as these guys do deserve these promotions anyway.
Yeah, I don't want to take away from the work they've done. Don't get me wrong here, but I just wondered if, maybe there's something else kind of driving this. And, you mentioned Mike Kafka getting a head coaching job. The Giants would also get the comp picks if he got hired, because apparently he does have, I think he's of Puerto Rican descent. So I think that would qualify under the rules of, getting comp picks if he gets hired. Justin, let's talk about some of the big decisions facing this franchise. And I think we've got to start with Saquon Barkley. I recently ran a poll on my X account, formerly known as Twitter, asking people, should the Giants just let him walk away or should they attempt to re-sign him? And a lot of people said they should just let him walk, which I found kind of interesting because last year I remember a lot of people saying, oh, the Giants should trade him and they should see what they can get for him. And now people are just saying, oh, just let him walk. What do you think? How do you see this playing out? What do you think the best case scenario is for the Giants if these two sides just can't get it done?
I do think it makes sense to let him test free agency and then see what the market has for him, see what the market has in store for him. Because I think if they were to franchise tag him again, I think that's really dirty business. I think that's you saw how much he didn't enjoy it the first time. And then especially if you were to franchise tag him with the sole intention of trading him, I understand wanting to get something for Saquon Barkley, but unless Saquon Barkley has like direct say of where he's going to go, again, it just feels like dirty business. Like why not give the player what he wants? It's like, hey, I want to see what I'm worth. Okay, well, why don't you go see what you're worth, especially this year where I don't think the running back free agency class is all that lucrative this year. So if the Giants want to match whatever the market dictates Saquon Barkley's worth is, then I think they should give themselves the opportunity to do that. But I do kind of hope for both sides that it trends in that direction where let's see what the market dictates where his value is at this point.
You're not concerned, though, about another team potentially negotiating on behalf of the Giants, coming up with a contract structure, and now it's up to the Giants to match it or exceed it. Nor are you concerned about the fact that, if Barkley does move on to another team, the Giants won't get anything necessarily until the following year, and that's if they don't cancel it out by their own free agent signing. So that doesn't concern you?
No, because honestly, and this is nothing against like him as a person or anything. I am ready at this point. If the tenure is to end, I'm ready for it, Patty. I want to focus the Giants' offense and specifically, the offensive line. I want to focus on a running game and not have it centered around a running back. I think that's been some people's arguments since the day that we drafted him in 2018, and I'm just looking at another year where he missed games. Obviously, 2022 serves as like, this is Saquon Barkley at his best, but he had a lot of volume that year. Still got a lot of volume this year. Missed games with an ankle again, and it just feels like as time goes on, we're continuing to get removed from 2018 and 2019, where he was his most explosive. I think you could see it with your own eyes that even though he is still a really good player, he's not the same player that he was, and it's a brutal business for running backs. So that, obviously Saquon Barkley being a Giant for life that benefits the Giants, it benefits him. But I am ready if it is the decision of Joe Schoen. I am ready at this point. And if another team wants to come in and give him a nice contract, which I am rooting for that as well. I'm ready for at this point, if there is going to be a divorce and a separation, I'm ready to embrace that.
And then, of course, there's the theory that, it's better to let go of a player a year early than to hold on to him a year too late.
Yeah, for sure.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased about your life. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, and it's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. The big question here for the Giants, besides Saquon, is the quarterback situation. Now, you go and you look at the Chiefs, you look at the 49ers. Both of those teams were built very differently. The Chiefs were fortunate enough to get a generational talent at quarterback, and they built around it. Okay. The 49ers, on the other hand, didn't really have a generational quarterback, so they built from the inside out. And both teams had success. Of course, the Chiefs ended up winning the Super Bowl, so you can argue that they've had more success since they had the start of a dynasty. So that being said, when you look at where the Giants are currently at with the quarterback situation, do you just say, you know what, last year was an aberration? You had the offensive line was a mess with the injuries. You had Darren Waller missing for part of the year. You had Saquon Barkley missing for part of the year. Do you just say, look, we're going to just run it back with Daniel Jones for better or for worse? Or do you say, we might want to go and look to get another quarterback in here, for the long term because of Jones's injury history, because he regressed so badly last year?
I mean, I think the way that the Daniel Jones contract is set up, where he's on the team this year, and I think Joe Schoen is not going to touch that $47 million cap hit. And then you have 2025, where even though it's a big dead cap number, it's a contract that they can get out of. They set this up in a way that was very, very intentional. The Daniel Jones contract, where it was an investment in him, but it also was we could look to the future if we want to. And Patty, here's my big speech, like for this Giants in their off season. I want them to get a young and exciting quarterback in here. I want them to get a quarterback with a big arm. I want them to get a quarterback that can manipulate the pocket and can move and can run and can extend plays, and a quarterback that's exciting for Brian Dable to work with, because that's the big thing. It's I want Brian Dable, specifically Brian Dable, not just any coach. I want Brian Dable to work with a young, dynamic, fun quarterback with a big arm. But the Giants roster just has a much bigger problem than that, where you talked about the Chiefs and the 49ers. And, I've taken on more of covering the NFL this year with our JM Football YouTube channel. And the main thing that I've just learned about, just looking at the good teams in the NFL, especially look at these playoff teams, there are all pro players, top to bottom, on a lot of these rosters. Especially you look at the final four teams, the Ravens, the Lions, the 49ers, the Chiefs, from top to bottom, O-line, receivers, forget the quarterback, obviously, because the quarterbacks are really good. O-line, receivers, tight end, edge rushers, secondary players, even the linebackers. The linebacker, the devalued position. Look at the Chiefs. They have 4 linebackers that teams would kill for, and that's the position that's devalued. Leo Chanel is one of the reasons why they won the Super Bowl. And he was a guy that fell in the draft the year that he was drafted. So the point is, the Giants need not just good players on their roster. We need to start adding great players. And if that comes at the cost of, well, we don't feel like there's a great quarterback for us to take this year at 6, we can't trade up because no team wants to trade up, or, we don't want to trade back because we want to stay at 6, we want to trade back, acquire more picks. They need great players. That is what the Giants need, and this offseason is so important for it. Because if they do want to trade back, if they don't want the quarterback at 6, and there's a team that wants like a JJ McCarthy, then great. And the pressure, you get more lottery picks to add more great players, right? But they also have enough ammo this year where if they want to stay put at 6, that they could draft great players. They have a lot of picks in the top 100. Kind of reminds you of the 2022 year. They need to add great players to this team. Whether the quarterback comes first with it at 6 or if they trade up, great. If it means that they spend this year adding great players and they add to what was a good draft class last year, great. But that is the main thing, Patty. The Giants need to add great players. And it doesn't matter if they have a quarterback or if they don't have a quarterback. If Daniel Jones is the answer or Daniel Jones is not the answer. If they do not add great players to this roster, the team won't go anywhere.
All right, Justin, let's transition now to what's coming up. We have, excuse me, we have obviously the scouting combine is going to be up first, then free agency, then the draft. When you look at the biggest pressing needs on this Giants team, and you say to yourself, okay, how do they go about filling it? What's your assessment as far as the biggest needs, number one, and whether they go draft or free agency to fill those needs?
I'll start off with free agency first. I'm a big believer in stacking up in the secondary and stacking up at corner. So possibly adding a cornerback that is an upgrade to Adoree Jackson. You had a great line just a couple minutes ago. It's better to let a player go maybe a year early instead of investing in him. And I feel like Adoree Jackson, while I'd be open to a reunion, it's a player that's missed a couple games the last couple years, and he's approaching that age 30 year. I feel like Adoree Jackson may be heading to that point on a little bit of a downturn versus his time at the Giants has been relatively good. So I am very, very open to adding, a cornerback 1 or a cornerback 1B. Hopefully, if they view Deonte Banks as a future CB1, I want to make that strength a bigger strength, especially in Shane Bowen's defense, where he had some younger corners in Tennessee, didn't necessarily fit the bill. They didn't necessarily give full-on investments at cornerback in Tennessee, and you saw how kind of poor they've been in the past, relatively the last couple of years. So hopefully, the Giants in free agency can add a veteran presence at corner, while there are still a lot of younger guys in that secondary room that you can add in the draft as well. I also view Xavier McKinney, like now, going from Wink Martindale's defense to Shane Bowen's defense, I view Xavier McKinney as an imperative re-sign. The franchise tag is a little high at $16 million. I didn't think it was going to be that high, but it little high at $16 million, so don't know if you want to pay him for 1 year. But going from Bowen's defense, I think you could see McKinney's numbers return back to what they were with Patrick Graham, where they're playing a little bit more too high. Xavier McKinney kind of has half-field responsibilities, or they're disguising coverages. They're moving pre-snap, post-snap, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you saw what Kevin Byard's numbers were. I believe 9 or 10 interceptions through his first 2 years there under Bowen's defense. I think McKinney's numbers can return back to that not just being a preventer, but a playmaker under Bowen's defense. So I view him as an imperative re-sign, investing in that secondary. Obviously there's going to be cuts that they can make to create some cap space and maybe round out the roster. But I would say free agency, I'm big on defense right now. And then in the draft, I would be, maybe going offense, and then more of those premium positions.
Yeah, like for example, wide receiver 1, which this team could definitely use.
Yeah.
Maybe a tight end somewhere on day 3, because I don't know how much longer they're going to be able to get out of, Darren Waller. And let's talk offensive line, because that's another big, debating point, if you will, that amongst Giant fans. I think we can both agree that the Giants have 2 studs, or at least a stud and a stud in the making, in Andrew Thomas and John Michael Schmitz at center, who's, got to play a little bit more consistently, but he's shown promise. The rest of the offensive line right now, big question mark, and that includes Evan Neal. So I want to start there, Justin. Do you think that the Giants are just, they have said that Evan Neal is the right tackle. He did it in college, where, if I'm not mistaken, I think he was more of a left tackle. I could be wrong if my memory's incorrect here. But what do you do on that offensive line? I'm of the opinion you bring in a veteran to calm that line down, a veteran that has guard tackle capability. But how would you like to see them approach it?
This is the tough scenario, right? And especially, it kind of feels like it's going to come down to the draft, where even in free agency, even if you add like a swing tackle, right? If they go the Cam Fleming route, what they did, 2020, or even I would love to take a Mike Remmers from 2019. I think we even took him for granted, But even if you do that, I don't think that limits you from, if the Giants want to draft the tackle at 6, or if they want to draft the tackle, or if they want to trade back draft. I don't feel like that limits you from doing anything there. But regardless, I just want it to be done. I want it to be fixed. And I don't think that's going to come with Evan Neal at right tackle. And I think the Giants could say whatever they want at this point, but I do think that ship has kind of sailed with Evan Neal being the answer at right tackle. Could Evan Neal turn it around and maybe be a serviceable player? But I think, yes, but I think the expectation of being a top 10 pick stud, I think that has sailed. So if you view tackle as a premium position in the draft, and that's where you want to go, maybe at 6, I do think it is more likely, though, like if we're thinking what the most likely scenario is, that they do go with a veteran. You need to add a veteran presence, some sort of swing tackle that can at least compete with Evan Neal during the summer and during the early parts of the season. And then if Evan Neal isn't up to par, then you go wherever, you go with the veteran. And then hopefully this line can survive, because you cannot have an unsurvivable offensive line like we had last year, especially without Andrew Thomas to start.
But is it fair? I saw a statistic, the Giants offensive line gave up, I think it was 85 sacks this year, or they were credited with 85 sacks, second most in league history since sacks became a trackable stat. But I saw a statistic that said that the Giants' 2 quarterbacks, DeVito and Jones, were responsible for those pressures turning into sacks. So in other words, it wasn't all on the offensive line. So, when you look at that, do you say, okay, maybe the O-line isn't as big of a disaster as we think it is? Or do you just say, in other words, what's the happy medium here? Do you say get a quarterback who can process faster, or just pour your resources into the offensive line?
I think it's both, and I think it's way more important to look at it with Daniel Jones than Tommy DeVito, because I think Tommy DeVito was in a league of his own, literally of taking sacks. But man, it was I can't describe how bad everything was the first 10 weeks of the season. And even, Jones was, that was Daniel Jones' span, even though he did miss time within the first 10 weeks of the season with the neck injury, I believe, as well. But it's almost indescribable. Like, you can't point to one thing through the first 10 weeks of the season what went wrong. They couldn't run the ball. They couldn't block. Daniel Jones couldn't avoid sacks. There was no quick game because everything was being figured out. Daniel Jones couldn't push the ball down the field. It just, there was nothing to hang your hat on. Nothing. So, I hate to give like an answer that's like a non-answer, but I say it's both. And that's just how bad the first 10 weeks was. And then I do think when Pugh came in, added that veteran presence, and then you finally saw guys start to settle down. And I hate to say this too, when Evan Neal started to not be in the lineup and Tyree Phillips was in the lineup, that's when you saw the line kind of really calm down. And especially was with the latter part of the year with Tyrod Taylor there. Andrew Thomas is flying on, one leg basically for the latter part of the whole year. And that's when you saw the line start to stabilize a little bit. So quarterback play 100% has a ton to do with it and your ability to avoid sacks and manipulate the pocket. But through the first 10 weeks of the season, that line was also very, very bad, especially with that Andrew Thomas.
Hey, Giant fans, if you're having trouble finding those last-minute tickets to your favorite concerts, shows, and sporting events, Game Time has you covered. They offer a wide selection of seats, complete with seat views to help you decide where to sit, and they're constantly offering last-minute tickets through flash deals. There are no hidden fees. You know exactly what your deal is before you check out. And Game Time even has tickets available as late as an hour after an event starts, making it truly the best place to find last-minute deals at amazing prices. Want more reasons to trust Game Time? They offer event cancellation protection. And if you find tickets in the same section and row for less elsewhere, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Terms apply. All right, now Shane and Dable are going into year 3. And obviously, John Mara has said he doesn't want to keep turning over the GM spot. He doesn't want to keep turning over the head coaching spot. So that being said, if the Giants have another down year, maybe with a record even worse than last year's 6-11, do you think they were in trouble, or do you just kind of look at the circumstances as to why they had a down year, and do you give them another shot the following year?
I think they're in trouble if they have. So I'm going to forget the ending record for a second. That 2-8 stretch even had us questioning in the middle of it. Not like, I don't think anybody was calling for Shane or calling for Dable. But through the first 10 weeks of the season, I think that we were all whispering, saying, can Dable, at least Dable, because you're not really talking about the GM in season, I think, right? Can Dable survive this? Because it was looking like it was going to be top 3 pick territory, which, hey, that's what a lot of people wanted. And I'm kind of glad that, in a way, I'm glad. I think in New York it's different. I do think in New York it's different, where the noise does get louder when you have 2 or 3 wins in the month of December. I think it's different. And we were whispering in October, like, hey, we understand how awesome 2022 was. I do think Brian Dable's a good coach. I do think Joe Shane deserves a couple more years to have draft classes that are good. I really liked the 2023 draft class that they had. But that start was so bad that you're like, that may get all thrown away. Because if they don't win another game, will John Mara be okay with this? So I think last year, let's just say they tread water 2-8, and it continues to get worse from that 2-8. Yeah, I think Joe Shane and Brian Dable would have survived that. But if they get off to another start like that, where it was just really, really bad football, I don't know if they survive it. I really don't. And Dave Gettleman got 4 years, and that this would be Joe Shane and Brian Dable's 3rd year. I don't know if they'll be able to survive another really, really bad start like that. And I think a lot of people sometimes do forget, while they did finish the season strong with especially with Tyrod, and the Tommy DeVito mania was really fun. That 2-8 stretch was not fun football. It was very, very bad football. And I don't know if they could go through that again.
But how much of that 2-8 stretch was a result of the injuries and the constant lineup changes?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll tell you what, Dallas, I think the season ended the first drive of the year, which is maybe dramatic, but I think you hear sometimes some of the players mentioned even in the middle of the season, they were still talking about that Dallas game, just how off guard that game got them. They got punched in the mouth. And it went from John Michael Schmitz's high snap. They had that first drive where they drove down the field. Daniel Jones was running and Saquon's running and drive right down the field. That's all high snap, man. All right, well we'll get a field goal and let's play some defense. High snap, field goal block. Andrew Thomas tears his hamstring, and then boom, and that's like the one player. There's a reason why the left tackle's the second most important position in the game of football. And then you feel like after Thomas gets his hamstring and he's out, then everything else falls apart from there, right? So I really do think the Dallas game just caught. They went into that game thinking we could win this game, and to lose 40-0. I do think that threw a wrench in the season. I 100% think it did.
I agree. I definitely agree. They came out and they didn't look ready. They said they were ready. They felt ready, but they didn't look ready. And I attribute that to how Dable got them ready in the preseason. I mean, they had all these new parts on offense, and what the starting offense got, a series or two in the preseason game against the Carolina Panthers, who weren't a very good team. So you really didn't know what you had. They were relying on practice, and it just seemed like they were putting too much of an emphasis, in my opinion, on keeping guys healthy throughout the summer so that they could go in with a full deck of cards, if you will.
Were you there in Detroit?
No, I didn't make Detroit, but I did follow it.
I mean, and you've been at certain joint practices before, but that was my, Bobby and I, we're very thankful that, we worked with, the Giants team and the Lions team, and they were able to get us there. We drove out in the van. It was a lot of fun. We saw the way that they practiced. And every team is different. You saw the way a Joe Judge team practiced, and it was intense, and it was hard, it was physical, and that didn't necessarily lead to wins and losses, right? But the Lions are good. And the way that even they practice special teams, it's like I feel like I'm watching a completely different game right now. I feel like I'm watching a team that's in a completely different league, or they're operating by their own rules. That's almost like what it felt like. And it's known that Dable runs a country club, and I know a lot of players like that, and they don't want to be worked and stressed and really work that hard in training camp, work to the brim. And there's a thing with the load management and the exercise science, and Darren Waller would have his vet days. I guess I get it. I'm not going to act like I'm smart enough to be like, these guys should play every day, but I do think there's a balance. I 100% think there's a balance, because this team, it's kind of 2 years in a row now where the offense thinks week one to start the year that we could throw it around the yard. We could sling it around the yard. We could do whatever we want. And then they very quickly learned, no, we can't. We can't sling it around the yard. Maybe we don't have the personnel to do this. Maybe we don't have the, maybe even the quarterback to really sling it around the yard. And then 2022, they adjusted and they ran the ball and they worked the quick game. And then 2023, there really was no adjustment just because of how quickly everything kind of fell off the rails there. So 100%, Patty. I do think it could boil down to the summer and how they kind of prepare the team for sure.
Now, with that said, Brian Dable always talks about how he's had over 20 years in a coaching career, but he's only been a head coach now. He's going into his third year. Besides dialing back some of the intensity, what else can he change, do you think, that will make the biggest difference? And we just, of course, talked about preparing the team. That's something that's got to change. But is there something else that you feel that he can change to kind of get this team back on track?
Again, I may be reading into the reports that some people have put out this offseason, but it just seems like he does make some impulsive decisions, whether it's taking away play calling from Mike Kafka in game, and not making some calculated decisions. And that's really the main thing of, especially with the success of 2022, seeing the moves that they made to sign Fabian Moreau, Isaiah Hodgins, these guys in the middle of the season. It's like, yeah, it worked. Cool. These guys just fit and they work together great. And it's like there just seems to be cohesion and great communication and great chemistry between Brian Dable, the front office, and the coaching staff to the position coaches, and everybody is heard and they all communicate well. What are we looking for? Yes, this is what I'm looking for. Okay, we're going to bring in this player for you. So it's just seemed to all work in 2022, where in 2023, it clearly didn't work from a wins and losses standpoint. And then you hear some of the impulsive decisions that Dable makes of doing some different things in game. There's some meetings that he has with, analytics people in the front office. Like, hey, we're going to plan for this scenario in this scenario, this down and distance. If the score is this, okay, and let's do it on game day. And then Brian Dable does something different. So really, the main word that I've been using this offseason, it just feels like he's a little bit impulsive and taking the emotions that he has on the sideline, maybe with some of his players. I kind of don't mind that. I don't mind yelling at players and stuff like that. These are grown men. I think they could take it. But if you're going to do that to your staff, or if that's going to inflict how you act in your game day decisions, I think that's the thing that could certainly be changed. I'm not making those impulsive decisions. I think getting hot with your players, so I'm kind of cool with that. But it's when it gets to how do you differentiate from your game plans, that's where I think it could hurt the team.
Agree. All right, now final question for you, Justin. When you look at all that this team needs to do, and they've got a laundry list, let's be honest here. But what is the number one thing that this team either needs to address, answer, to get it back on the right track?
They need to be more explosive. They need to be more explosive on the offensive side of the ball. In the post-Daniel Jones era of the 2023 season, so weeks 11 to 18, they actually were 12th in explosive pass plays in game-neutral situations when the margin was between 0 points and 14 points. That's when you saw not great offensive play, but that's when you saw better offensive play. And they had zero semblance of a running game this year. Zero. Even when the offensive line kind of stabilized a little bit. If they could get more explosive and even just be average, like Patty, we've been talking for years, and I'm sure you're not surprised by this answer. You follow me on Twitter, I'm sure you see, like, geez, Justin's talking about explosive plays again. It's enough. We get it. But I haven't found a stat, like one singular stat that is more correlated to wins and losses than explosive pass plays. This is like the third or the fourth year in a row where I've been doing this, where if you were a team that finishes in the top 10 in explosive pass plays in game neutral situations, your average winning percentage is 67%. That's crazy. I haven't found anything that is more closely correlated than that. So the Giants need to get to an area where they are a modern offense and explosive pass plays, whether that is pushing the ball down the field, whether that is a team that's being more centered around yards after the catch and adding more athletes. There are teams that do it in multiple different ways, but regardless, that's the area that the Giants need to get better in. And until they do, then they're not going to be a modern, good NFL team, at least in my opinion.
Hence why I keep saying that I would not be surprised if wide receiver 1 is how they go in the draft. I mean, right. It makes too much sense. I know people want a quarterback. I don't think they're going to get a shot at the top quarterbacks. I think they could potentially get a quarterback in day 2 if they really want one. But they've got to get an explosive receiver. And I think back a couple of years ago, I don't know if you remember, Joe Shane kind of downplayed having a number 1 receiver. He says, well, if you look around the league, there are a lot of number 1 receivers sitting at home. And I thought, okay, that's just an excuse. Maybe because he didn't think there would be a number 1 receiver to be had. But this year, I think it's got to be a top priority.
Sure.
So, all right, Justin, great stuff. Appreciate it. Always enjoyed talking ball with you. And of course, with Bobby, who we'll have on the show at a later date. So I want to thank you for coming on with me. And Giant fans want to thank you for tuning in, as always, to the Locked On Giants podcast. Be sure to tune in tomorrow. We'll have more on Locked On Giants. And don't forget to check out Justin and Bobby on Talkin Giants. They do a fantastic job, and really appreciate their friendship and also their work that they put in. So we'll see you tomorrow, Giant fans. Have a great one.